All right, well, this is the fourth, maybe fifth, I think this is the fifth time I pulled the supercharger off. Had a lot of problems with the fuel injectors. So we had two sets of injectors. The first set of injectors were shorty EV6s. Come to find out, those were actually the 80-pound injectors for the F-body Camaro when we put that car on Holly Dominator. So that was a mistake. It's all good. We just ended up getting some parts mixed up. So we came down and we ended up getting the injector dynamics set up. So these are the Whipple injectors. And if you can see from the base of the Whipple injector to that plug is a lot taller. And after talking to a couple people, that's Whipple's fault. They do that intentionally because they don't like injector dynamics or other injector companies. And they also changed the diameter inside the Whipple supercharger to a smaller diameter. Most injectors are 14 millimeter. I don't know if these are, maybe 13 millimeter or even an American size, but Injector Dynamics ended up sending us the lower O-rings for the lower fuel injector spacer, and then I removed the fuel injector spacer on the top. The problem that causes is it makes this fuel rail sit on the lower bolt hole setting, which makes everything contact the contact the valve covers and the cam beds on top of the cylinder head. So I've been back and forth trying to get this thing bolted in there, and it's been an absolute nightmare. So I'm on the tail end of it. Injector Dynamics sends us a new EV6 plug. Sorry for the shitty lighting. And it's, I guess, technically lower profile, but it was actually no lower profile than the factory plugs. So all I did was I removed the lock retainer, which is the red clip you normally see here, and then I actually ground down the body of the clip. Sorry, I was trying to pull it away from the supercharger there. So you can see how it's ground down. So I didn't even actually get into the injector part of it, just the actual retainer clip that bolts that clip onto the fuel injector. So that got these injectors sitting against the supercharger as tight as they possibly can, because they still do not sit high enough to lock into that retainer, nor would they be able to bolt this fuel rail because it would need to be on the top bolt. So it would still need a spacer here, but the spacer that was supplied is actually too tall, and we can't really find anything that's any shallower. So let me turn this compressor off. Whipple comes with these retainer pieces that are supposed to be, I don't even know where they're at, right here. Retainer pieces that lock the fuel injector into a forward rotation. The reason for that is these injectors at least are multi-spray, so they will actually spray in either direction. I'm not 100% sure how it works. I'm not well versed in Ford 5-liter stuff, but versed enough to get me in trouble, as we can obviously see. So with these new injectors, they're obviously not, especially for how tall they're sitting inside of here. We're just using these for added performance. I'm going to assume to piggyback off of the direct port, since this engine actually has direct port in the cylinder head, and it has these 4 injectors on each side of the supercharger for each bank. So anyways, long story short, the injector dynamics were the correct injectors that we were supposed to be running. So I took the top spacer off of them, and they were supposed to actually come with a EV6 clip to replace too. I didn't want to change everything out. It didn't seem logical to me, because I didn't find that these EV6 clips were any better fitting than the OEM stuff, and either set would have had to get trimmed down. So I pulled the lock pins out of all of the EV6 plugs from the factory Ford harness, and then I went ahead and, might be difficult for you to see, but right inside here I ground away on the actual lock clip and barely just dusted the bottom of the injector. All plastic, all cosmetic stuff that would allow these injectors to seat closer to the supercharger. We're running on the lower bolt hole for the fuel rail, which caused a lot of problems. Between the wiring for the fuel injectors, normally these are on the outside of the rail, I had to actually tuck them and take material off of the inside of the fuel rail to get some relief for the wiring coming up, which nothing's binding, everything's got a lot of free flow on it. And then outside of that, to get the map sensor wiring up top, and to try and get away from the cam bed I believe on the 5 liters it's the cam bed. It's in between the valve cover and the cylinder head. So that bed was contacting each part of this. So what I did is it's all installed now. For the last time going in, I really hope the last time it's going in, I taped off all the ports and taped off the engine bay and went ahead and did some clearancing. No matter what I did, I could not get around the fact that the fuel rail contacted this valve cover. So it's plastic, don't care, came really close, but it's worth the clearance. So you can see here, all along any of the factory castings that were nubbed out. This is the bed I'm speaking of when I call it a cam bed. I'm pretty sure it's a cam bed, but I have not actually tore down a Gen 3 5.0. I've definitely seen a bunch of Gen 2s and Gen 1s tore down online. I'm assuming that's a cam bed. Anyways, basically all of this stuff needed to get clearanced for that fuel rail sitting down inside here and trying to keep the clip retainers properly orientated. So I think I got it. This is round 1652 of me installing this supercharger, and golly, that thing is not light. Especially when you put the air to water cooler on it. I will say this 100%, Magnusons are lighter. There is no question about it. I've installed a bunch of Magnuson superchargers and they are tremendously lighter than the Whipples. If you're conscious on weight, you kind of make your decision on that one. So I'm not going to get into a couple different things between the supercharger companies, but this is what we have. This is what we're running with. This is actually smog compliant in California, so we're going to run it. We are not putting nitrous on this truck anymore after talking with the tuner, because we found out some issues about the newer Gen 3 5 liters that I didn't know. So we have to kind of change plans a little bit on what we're doing, and that's going to involve us no longer running nitrous. So anyways, without me continuing to talk, let's go ahead and All right. This has been a debacle for one specific reason. We've been back and forth, so you guys have seen the tail end of it. We're a couple days later due to a lot of complications. So I got as much footage as I possibly could, but we had a problem with injector clearance, and then obviously with the JBA headers. So for anybody interested, JBA headers do not bolt into a 2021 F-150. They do to an extent. They're installed, they fit with the exhaust system, they do clear. Two things: passenger side frame rail needs to be cut and modified, and your dipstick does not fit anymore. So I'm going to talk to AEH and see if maybe we can put a Gen 2 dipstick in it, because I'm assuming that these headers are for Gen 2. Oh, I don't think you guys have seen the RideTech yet. I gotta do the headlight sensors too, but I'll kind of go over all the RideTech setup that we have in the truck. I gotta lift it up a little bit, and then we'll do all that when I get it over to the alignment shop. The header complication was a nightmare. I ended up having to lift the engine completely off of the frame pedestals just to get them installed, let alone trying to get them bolted in. We went ahead with stage 8 fasteners, just due to most Coyotes and LS header bolts backing out, but due to the complications of just getting to the bolts themselves with the way that the headers are designed, even the stock headers were a nightmare, but not anything worse than I've heard the Mustang guys have to go through. But we weren't actually able to use the locking fasteners on them. Right now I have the dipstick tube bent because we don't want, obviously, the crankcase to breathe. So I have it bent and metal tied to the header so we can get this thing tuned, and then I'll get it back before we take it for its actual maiden voyage. I will probably have to go with an aftermarket Coyote dipstick, or possibly a Gen 2 Coyote dipstick. I'm not 100% sure yet, but it is secure for now. I was not impressed with Whipple's airbox. The molded plastic was tweaked all to hell, and it doesn't, I mean, it fits, don't get me wrong. It looks like it flows very well, it fits very good, but it didn't seem like there was a lot of quality spent on the way that the mold was designed. Even though, I mean, once it's in, it's fine, but if you ever had to service this thing and you weren't, you know, if you weren't able to take your time and get patience with it, it's gonna cause you a nightmare. I mean, it's still sitting up, it's hitting the hood strut. It doesn't have any locking pins on the bottom of the mold when it goes inside the rubber, so it doesn't actually stay locked down. It's like trying to force itself up. And then once you torque down the top hat doesn't sit flat. The rubber on the filter is really malleable, so the actual airbox wants to pull the bolts through and not really pinch it. It's a lot of things, but aside from that, it actually is a nice intake system. We still have the 3.875 pulley on it right now. The 3.5 pulley will go on when we get it over to AEH for getting it tuned. Had some problems with the fuel lines because the rails are sitting lower for the Injector Dynamics EV6 injectors. Aside from that, outside of the Whipple setup, we have a J&L oil separator. The oil separator is nice. It's a nice unit, especially for the price. The only issue I really had with it is where they wanted you to mount it. They wanted you to actually mount this bracket on top of the battery box and have that oil separator sitting way up here. It's an eyesore, and it was absolutely crazy. So I modified the bracket, bolted it to the aluminum rail that holds the fuse box and everything to this back piece, so it's nice and solid now, and then routed the hoses together, and then I just used the line separator to keep it nice and clean. Yeah, you might have to get down here a little bit and, you know, fight with getting the actual canister loose, but I mean, at the end of the day, in my opinion, you can just take these two off, pull it out here, and if you have any problems with spilling, I mean, that's just kind of on you. Put a drip pan underneath it, you'll be fine. Right here we have the wideband O2 and the boost gauge. Both are running glow shift sensors, so this is the glow shift unit. I'm going to route that out and down into the engine bay at a later point in time. Right this very second, I can't get the passenger door all the way open. I don't want to scratch the truck, so I'm gonna load up the Whipple tune now. I'm waiting on some water wetter to come in so that we can get the supercharger filled up, and then I have OEM coolant, so I'm gonna get that filled up and then ideally get this thing started. We had another problem with the plugs too. I was told to order some NGK 6510s. 6510s do not go into the cylinder heads on a Gen 3. The spark plug hole diameter is smaller. I couldn't find a 6510 that had a different thread pitch, so I went ahead and ran the Ford Performance. All right, Whipple got the tune back. I got the oil changed in it. Everything's looking good to go. I did start it to get the fuel up, and then now I'm gonna try and get this thing up to operating temperature and see if I can take it on its first test drive before we get it off to alignment. So, see how well this thing runs. Runs pretty damn good. Take a while to purge all the air out. I purged the air out before it was running, so that's why it's topped off a little high, because I know there's going to be a little bit of residual air inside there. This pump is supposed to self-bleed, so it will actually slow down the pump rate, and when it starts to feel air, and then it will pick it back up. I'm going to assume there's going to be a little bit of cavitation. I mean, very minimal, but a little bit. But that's a smart pump, so it's going to do its own little thing. So just monitor this as much as we can, because you don't want to go wide open throttle when this thing's got air inside the system. So we got some more time to be letting that off. I bled the coolant, vacuumed the coolant, put it all back in. We've got no leaks, no oil leaks, no coolant leaks, no nothing. The belt's staying tight. So I'm gonna let this thing get up to operating temperature, pull the Mustang out, and then pull the F-150 out and turn it around, because I still got to do the lethal dual pump. And then obviously finish up the back half of the exhaust. So I will, when I get this thing back up in the air, we'll kind of go over that, because we don't have to be at the alignment shop until tomorrow. We've got some camber and some other stuff from how low the truck is sitting. So this is basically ride height, as you can see. So updated after the first test drive. Everything seems to be running pretty damn good though. All right, exhaust is wrapped up. Full stainless steel, 3-inch all the way back. Finally got the headlight sensor bracket in from RideTech. That's installed. Rear suspension is torqued. I'm gonna go through. I gotta tighten the upper control arms, and then we are headed off to alignment. This exhaust system goes from the factory catalytic converters. It's got a set of JBA headers like we talked about before. It goes to the factory flange. In the state of California, I'm not allowed to modify anything from this flange back to the header flange due to state regulations. But aside from that, anything else is modified within legal parameters. And then obviously we have a DBA law here now, which this one's pretty close to requirements. I don't think it's going to be too crazy. Wide open throttle, it's going to be pretty intense, but this goes to a 3-inch Y pipe, Borla X pipe. This is actually for a 5-liter Mustang, if I'm not mistaken. We had found it a while back and wanted to use it on something and decided to use it here. Pair of twin mufflers, dual 3-inch that go all the way back over the axle, 90 out with another 90 straight to the dual tips. We were gonna have to kind of do a 2.5-inch collector and some other stuff to modify the factory exhaust, and I finally said screw it, I'm just gonna redo the entire thing. So, driveline hoop here, we have a diff brace up there. Everything else is already back and torqued in, so we'll kind of, when we get it up on the lift at the alignment shop, I'll kind of show you a little bit about the front suspension. Aside from that, we're looking pretty good. At full droop, this tire contacts the upper control arm, but we have a lot of negative camber right now, which, if you know, your negative camber is not gonna actually pull your tire away from your upper control arm, but it's gonna change the geometry so that at full droop, I think it's not gonna touch. So until we get this thing aligned and at its final ride height, I'm not going to be 100% sure. Worst case scenario, I know the BC forged wheels will clear no problem. They're only positive 30. These are positive 44 factory from Ford, but we can't daily drive on the BC forged wheels because they have a set of Mickey Thompson ET streets. You can't tow with those. A lot of other reasons why we're not going to run that tire daily. So I'll kind of address that later. Worst case scenario, we have enough lip on the center ring to run like a 6mm spacer, which would be plenty. But the idea is basically this thing should never be at full droop, so I'm not going to see much problem with it. 3.5 or maybe 4. I think the 3.5-inch exhaust tips, flat black to kind of keep it symmetrical. Obviously dual tips to be symmetrical also, and then leaving the factory tow hitch. That tow hitch is actually really strong. I was gonna change it out or possibly brace it, but I see nothing wrong with those. So I'm gonna get this thing dialed up. We're gonna take it for its first test drive, but it actually does sound great. And the Camaro, he likes sleeper builds. He doesn't like stuff that looks too gaudy. So, you know, trying to be distinguished as best as we possibly can with this thing. So, I think the sound's clean. It's crisp. It's not obnoxious. We're good to go. So, no check engine lights. Everything's flash tuned from the Tomahawk that is provided with Whipple, but that will be changed when we get this thing over to AEH. So, or sorry, AED. Once AED gets it, he's going to change the whole tune and go through everything to modify for the injectors and plugs and different other things that we got going on. So, let's get this thing down off the cribs, get this thing to the alignment shop, and clean this damn place up because we got the F-body Camaro coming in. I think I'll get a couple shots of doing the work on that thing too to get it prepped for the race. We got some plexi windows, different trunk lid, and obviously get the spoiler and everything attached to that thing. So, get this thing cleaned up and get her on the road today.